This story takes place near Joplin, Missouri. There was this man who had lived in this farmhouse for 24 years. And he said, one day it was starting to get late. He was finishing up some work in one of his fields. As he was on the tractor, he said he sees this bright light hovering over the tractor. And he said, it was just this big orb of light. And he said it just sped past him really fast and just took off into the sky. And at the time, he said, just something about it seemed really, really off. So he said later that night, he got the dogs inside and, he was getting ready to go inside for the night. But he said he just remembered like the air was really, really stale. Like there was just something off. So he goes inside the house and he started cooking some dinner. And he said he remembered there was like this heavy wind whipping against the house. And he said, it must be ready to storm or something because I can feel the wind like almost rattling and shaking the home. But the odd thing was when he looked out the window, he said all the trees, the cornfields, everything was just completely still. So he's like, where is that sound of the wind coming from? Right at that moment, he hears a bang at the front door, like someone's knocking. So he goes immediately to the front door. And when he opens the door, he said there was a man standing right on the porch. And he described him as looking like, Abraham Lincoln, wearing clothing from like the 1800s. He had this big top hat on. And he said he just had this very pale white face. And he said the man didn't move. He just kept his head straight and he was staring at him the whole time. Now, he kept asking him, like, what do you want? Why are you here? Like, what do you need? The guy would not respond. And he said eventually he was like, all right, you know what? I'm shutting the door. You need to leave. Obviously, you don't want to answer me. So he closed the door and he said when he looked out the window, this guy was gone. So later that night, he's in bed and he said once again, he could hear the sound of like a heavy wind whipping against the house. But when he looked out his bedroom window, the trees were completely still. And all of a sudden, he said he heard his front door like open. And at the time, he thought, the wind must have blown the door open. I must have not closed it all the way. So he gets up out of bed. He heads towards the front door. And he said when he got to the front door, it was wide open. And there was like no wind outside. So he closed the door. And he said when he turned around, he heard kind of like just this weird sound. And he said when he looked up on the ceiling, there was the man that was standing on his porch, hanging from the ceiling by all fours, looking down at him. And he said the next thing he remembered, it was morning time.